Hi, Brett Berquist at University of Auckland in New Zealand. It's obvious we've got a very big time difference between us, but it's great to see you. Thank you for spending time today.
Thanks, Elspeth. Lovely to talk to you.
So I'm interested in your role, first of all, Brett. Your title is Director International. What does that involve at the University of Auckland?
So it involves all things international, but the core of it, of course, is international recruitment. Last year, we had about 9,000 international students here, and how we reach those targets. So T&E agenda, international partnerships, all the usual extent of it. We also have a very strong outbound learning mobility program. Our target was 1 in 4 graduates having had an international learning experience before they graduate. The first university in New Zealand to set a target. International partnerships and negotiations and contracts. We work with several international committees throughout the university. So the classic breadth of internationalization agenda.
So, for example, if you, I think people can understand some of those areas, but do you also get involved, for example, with faculty around internationalization of the curriculum, those kinds of areas?
So in New Zealand, it's a very different mix. And I often speak to this. I worked in Europe for about a dozen years and in the US for about the same period of time before coming to New Zealand. And international here is rarely about needing to convince people of the importance of it. We are in one of the most multicultural cities on the planet. 40% of Aucklanders in the last census were born outside of New Zealand. That's reflected in the staff, the academic staff and administrative staff of the university. So usually people from outside New Zealand are in the majority of any kind of meeting. So international inside the curriculum is something that just happens organically. And as a trading nation sitting where we sit, it's hard to find someone in New Zealand who doesn't understand that our future and our economic livelihood depends on effective trade with other countries. So we spend less time talking about that than we might in other institutions where sort of there's a push to be more international. That is just part of what we live and breathe here.
And other parts of the world maybe don't have the same understandings of it, and given your context, yeah. So I'm interested in particular then around the student experience and your responsibilities around the international student experience. And I wonder if you can give me some examples of how you get involved with that and what sorts of things you do.
Sure. So in New Zealand, we actually have a code of pastoral care, which is a law. So legally, we report every year to the government how we are complying with the code of pastoral care. It was recently revamped quite substantially. So I am the titular person responsible for our compliance with that law. And in my team, I have a team of about 45, 50 people overall. And one significant part of that team is the pastoral care provision for international students. Now, as we've been growing quite exponentially in the past 5 years, we're now 1 in 5 students in our student body is international. We have sort of mainstreamed our processes. So we no longer have an international center versus a domestic, it's all combined. And students can go for support inside the faculties, where there are student contact centers, as well as a central one. My team now operates as an escalation team when there's particular complications or servicing certain scholarship needs of students or visa compliance issues and things like that. But so the International Office is technically responsible for the provision of pastoral care for international students, but in a very distributed way throughout the university.
Okay, so in terms of the other thing which I really wanted to explore with you, I saw a post that you wrote on LinkedIn which looked really interesting around this 3-week micro-internship, and I wanted to ask you to explain a bit more about it because it looks absolutely fascinating. I know we're in this lockdown period, just to provide the context for that, but it just looks really interesting. So I was hoping you might be able to explain something more about that.
Sure, I'd love to talk about that. Can I start with a little bit of background as to how we got to that project? Is that all right? Okay.
Yeah.
So New Zealand has some of the most progressive work rights policies for international students on the planet, bar none. In the last election cycle, we, with the 8 universities in New Zealand, we proposed that we streamline post-study work rights. And when the government came into power, they accepted that proposal. So every student who graduates with at least 1 year of study here, from a bachelor's on up, has 3 years post-study work rights. Our PhD students, we've been doing this for about 15 years, we charge PhD students domestic tuition. So you can do a PhD in New Zealand in a top 100 university for about 5,000 US dollars per year in tuition per year. So it's the same rate that is charged to domestic students. So essentially the government subsidizes international PhD students at the same level as domestic. And that has brought our international PhD students up on par with domestic. It's been a very beneficial one. And they have full-time work rights from the time they land, as does their partner, and their dependents don't pay international school fees. So this has been a very distinctive offer, and I've done some analysis and presented on the results of that strategy previously. That's very beneficial for us. But at the same time, given the size of the country, we often are not recognized for the wonderful employability opportunities we offer. And as you know, employability outcomes are the drivers for many international students and their families, as they look at spending quite a lot of their hard-won earnings on something which they hope will really give them a more productive life and what they're hoping for. Employability outcomes are very important. So while we have the works policy with our government in strong alignment, we've been trying to promote more opportunities for international students to be able to take advantage of that. Recently, we've published some analysis of how much students take up post-study work rights and how many students migrate to New Zealand, actually in a chapter in a book series that you edited, in the book that Rob Quellen and Kate Gribble edited. We analyzed some government data on employability, long-term stay rates in New Zealand of domestic and international students. So we were able to compare those behaviors across domestic graduates and international graduates. It's a really wonderful set of data to kind of unpack that and look at it. So fast forward to what we're doing on employability. We offer all sorts of wonderful things around innovation, entrepreneurship, boot camps for pitches and so on. We give out a $100,000 prize to the best startup, lots of things like that. But one of the challenges we have with international students is sometimes they tend to focus on their grades first, being top of their class, work on your studies. And by the time, and they think about employability when they graduate. But if they haven't started to build a Kiwi story when they graduate and can't connect on the social end of things, it's difficult in the interview process. So we do things, for example, pairing them with alumni for some inside experiences early on. We have a whole series of things where we encourage international students to start building that story earlier. The challenge we have is scale. So one of the projects we're running takes in about 100 students and pairs them with alumni every semester. We're in our 5th year of that project. We're doing it now online. But we were looking for ways to scale that up. And we've been partnering with a branch of our local city government, the Auckland Tourism and Economic Development Board, and a joint venture with a local entity called Talent Solutions that works with New Zealand employers. And we've been doing the same thing, pilot experiences for a small group of students. And we've been working with them, how do we scale up? And what we're seeing down under in Australia and New Zealand is going into an online space to offer what we're calling a micro-internship, getting scale by having students work together as a team around a problem defined by a company, but they're not working in the company. You're getting this scale by an online platform, mentorship, a core curriculum and approach. So even before the crisis, we had already reached agreement with these external partners and our career services unit on campus to run a pilot with 100 Auckland students that we paid for um, at the time, right now in July, the 3 weeks between our 2 semesters. And next year, that same program will run with 1,000 students. So we're trying to get to that scale impact. So Auckland only for the 100, next year it's 1,000. So, and then what we did in this space is looking at the fact that we have about 1,000 students studying online with us in China, and they have the same needs to connect and employability. We thought it'd be really interesting to try to combine, leverage the technology and combine students studying in China who can't get in with those who are studying locally. So that's what's happening. We're right in the thick of that right now. It's a 3-week sprint. It's a real problem defined by a company. There's 8 companies. There's guidance to the students through our partner Talent Solutions, and the end report will be presented to these companies. But it's all online interaction, which allows the students in China and the students in Auckland to combine forces together. So
Okay.
there's 60 students in Auckland, 40 students in China.
So the Chinese students effectively are also linked to the Auckland employers, working with people who are based in New Zealand. Yeah, okay.
So
With students.
each team has some students here in Auckland and some students in China into a team.
Yeah, it sounds really fascinating. So then they're not in the company, they're doing it all online, and it's obviously ideal. I know New Zealand is ahead of the rest of the world in many respects for its response to the COVID pandemic. But still, it must have been a really ideal opportunity in a way to be looking at this during lockdown. How are you going to scale it up from 100 to 1,000?
Well, so this is actually a 3-year plan that we're in year 2 of this collaboration between the University of Auckland, ATED, Auckland Tourism and Economic Development Board, and Talent Solutions, this group that focuses on exactly this problem of how to get international students more ready for employability needs. It's something we've been focusing on a lot. Last year, we hosted the Global Internship Conference here in Auckland.
Yeah.
And we had a whole panel of New Zealand employers. We've been working with Education New Zealand on a series of studies of how New Zealand employers perceive international students. And it's been driving a lot of reflection on our end. There's a lot of resources here, but we're really trying to get the message out to students early so that international students start building that profile in New Zealand from the beginning of their studies, and so that they fully understand the policy settings which allow them to shift. One of the things we observed in the book chapter that I referenced in the series that you've been editing is that in 2015, 45% of skilled migrants in New Zealand who gained residency status, 45% of skilled migrants had been international students.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that tells you that it's definitely possible and the settings are there, but explaining to students how they can leverage that, even if they want a New Zealand experience to then further their career back home, it's about explaining how that works, how they can access it, how they can get ready to be a compelling candidate to take advantage of it when they finish their studies.
And you've obviously got a very favourable migration environment. For the government's creating that for migration into the country, presumably to facilitate it. Okay, so you're confident you're going to hit 1,000 of these micro-internships next year?
Well, so the goal that we have for next year, right now we're running a pilot for University of Auckland students only, and we funded that. The 1,000 goal will be across the Auckland region, so other universities will be able to participate as well.
Right, right. That sounds really interesting. Anyway, well, thanks for explaining more about that. It's very interesting. I also just wanted to touch on the fact that Auckland is number 1 in the Times Higher rankings on the sustainability rankings. Now, obviously, a lot of us in international education were thinking about sustainability, how much we fly around the world, all of the issues. And I know it would be remiss of me not to mention this about Auckland, because it's been top of those rankings for 2 years now. How do you do it, Brett?
Well, we have a really strong central planning office. with folks who really understand the rankings and the reporting needs.
Mm.
So right now we're 81 in the QS rankings and have been going up in those rankings through several steps. One of the keys to success there has been spending a lot of time in making sure how we report on publications. There is a lot of machinery work just to make sure that the systems catch the right references and so on. So there's been a lot of investment of effort for some very smart people in our planning office to work with researchers to make sure that the output is being adequately captured.
So
Right.
they must be doing that to begin with. I mean, it's not just a question of manipulating the rankings. I know, you know, they can be played with, but there must be an awful lot of good work going on for that
Yes.
to be recognized through. So, you know, presumably you must be touching on all kinds of different dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Absolutely. That was simply an illustration of what's been driving our rise in the QS rankings. Now, on the Times Higher side, we participated, only about half of the market participated in the first year of the Times Higher Education Global Impact Rankings around the SDGs. That was last year. And we came out number one. We were very happy with that. And we were a little nervous about how we were going to do this year because the rest of the market did come in. So we saw the full range of submissions you would normally expect in a global ranking. And so to come out number one again, we were very happy about that. And we have been presenting and publishing about how we got there. Actually, on our website, if you just Google us, you can find a full report which explains what we're doing for each one of the SDGs. It doesn't explain everything we're doing, but it's at least a key story of research that aligns to each one of the SDGs. And one of the biggest ones is actually number 17, partnerships. And this is a really nice segue back to the international scene because it really illustrates how deeply partnered we are and how long we've been doing this. So our collaboration with Auckland Council, our city government, is very, very strong. And for many years, we are members of 3 key international education networks, Universitas 21, the World Universities Network, and the Asia Pacific Rim Universities. And we lean into those in a really big way. We provide funding for academic and administrative staff to connect to those networks. And it's very beneficial to us because it allows us to really leverage those connections. We've also done very well in other parts of the SDGs that reflect our research strengths. And again, in this SDG report, you can really find out exactly what we're doing in that space. Coming back to what you said in the opening question about climate action, this is all something we've been reflecting on quite a bit. Now, New Zealand has a very green image, just out of the visual, you know, the amount of rain we get and so on. And on any given day, 85 to 90% of the energy we use in New Zealand is renewable. We have no nuclear here, we're an anti-nuclear country, but we have a lot of hydropower as well as geothermal power. So we have many positive stories. But when it comes to the university, we are working on a climate action plan. Last year, I commissioned a study from Elsa Lamont, who is one of the co-founders of the CANI, the Climate Action Network for International Educators, and we sponsored their first global summit. And that helped just within my area, the international office. We looked at our carbon footprint, and not surprisingly, given the sales force we're running, it was big. And we looked at ways to offset that. And we did make the decision to offset our own international office staff travel. We also made the decision to offset the carbon footprint for our outbound study abroad students, which is quite significant because we have 1 in 4 of our graduating bachelor students who are having an overseas learning experience. We're looking at ways to allow our incoming international students to offset as well. University-wide, it takes a step up, and the leaders of our sustainability team are actually looking at ways to inset the carbon footprint. And there are a number of other sustainable development goals that are happening. And they're becoming an important part of our current strategic planning process. So we are concluding our current strategic plan now in 2020. We met all of our international goals 2 years early. We have a new VC who's leading a new strategic planning process right in the middle of the COVID. And this will be very central to how we think about things going in the future. So we're hopeful that that will simply reinforce our focus on this area, and we're finding it very beneficial. It does really help to sharpen our conversation and to make sure that we're aware of what's happening in the different areas.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I mean, a lot of universities are talking about sustainability, but they're not all talking about sustainable development goals in the way that you clearly are. So I'll put a reference to the website on underneath the video. But thank you so much for explaining all that. I'm sure people find that really interesting, Brett. Thanks for taking the time to talk this morning for you, this evening for me. It's great to see you, and take care. Thanks
All right.
very much.
Thanks. Bye.